Most practices of any size have to outsource something. Rarely does any practice do everything in-house themselves. And if you're outsourcing a service or more than one service, that means you got to find somebody good to outsource it to. And that's not always so easy to do, especially if you're trying to pick a service for the first time. First time is when most mistakes are made. My guest today helps a lot of his clients make better choices when they're outsourcing vendors, and he's going to share some of his tips with us. I'm Carl White, principal at Mark Advisory Group, which is a healthcare marketing agency, and I'm also the host of PracticeCare. The mission for both is the same, and that's to help private practice owners stay private. Not only is that what they want, but I really believe that care is better when the provider owns the practice and they have the most clinical freedom to make the decisions that they think are best for their patients. Unlike when somebody else owns the practice, whether it's a hospital, a health system, private equity, owners in faraway lands, whoever they may be, usually what they want starts to whisper into the provider's ear, and sometimes that can cause some kind of compromise in a clinical choice that the provider might want to make for the patient. So let's just help keep them all private and get rid of that, any kind of compromise to begin with. And my guest today is Tom Maher. Tom has been a CPA in New York State for the past 37 years. And for the past 28, he's owned Practice First, which he bought back then, and he grew it about tenfold from a little over 600,000 in sales to a little over 6 million in sales. They specialize in revenue cycle management for physicians and laboratories, mainly in the Northeast and California. And their main product lines include billing, coding, accounts receivable, follow-up projects, credentialing, and enrollment. And it's pretty split between office and hospital-based practices. Tom, you clearly sound like a busy guy. I really appreciate you taking some time to come on PracticeCare.
Carl, thanks very much for having me.
Yeah, so I want to start where I start with every guest. We've got your bio. I just read it, but help us get to know you a bit better. How'd you arrive here? How'd you get into revenue cycle management of all things? I'm always curious about, smart people could have made a lot of, chosen a lot of paths. You chose this one. Why?
Yeah, it's funny, Carl. I started my accounting career at a large local CPA firm in the Buffalo area, and I kind of got slotted into their healthcare section and did audits of nursing homes and hospitals and large medical practices for a few years. So that was kind of my first taste of the healthcare business, and I took a job at our last client, which was a local hospital as a controller. And, that was basically the first 5, 6 years of my career. I left healthcare for a while, got into mortgage banking and a few other things. But this opportunity came up through another friend of mine that actually took care of all the accounting and tax stuff for this business. And he was looking to sell it, and it happened to be good timing, and the two of us bought it together. And then I bought him out about 5 years after that. So, 28 years later, here we are.
Yeah, the healthcare bug has bitten you. Definitely.
Yes.
So let's get into it. So, choosing to outsource something that you don't want to do yourself, or that you don't want to do what it would take to do it yourself, bringing in the skill set, hiring the people, whatever it might be. So we're talking about outsourcing, and let's just start with the basics. So the first question is, what's a good process to go through? And part of your answer, I'm curious of, there's a good process, and then there's where people kind of mess it up, or, shortcut or whatever. I'm curious, like, what the good process for you looks like, and where do you see people most commonly messing up?
Yeah, really, Carl, that this is, I'll kind of pose my answers, really for any sort of an outsourced service for a medical practice or really any business, as opposed to buying copy paper, that sort of a thing, more commodity based. And really, the mistakes can be made along a few different areas. But, the most important thing that I usually see where the mistakes are made are right at the beginning. Normally, if you were looking to outsource billing because you had a problem, you have a current problem, somebody wants to put the fire out immediately. They just want to find a solution that's better than they have. And a lot of times, there are so many things that are missed if that's what's driving the answer.
Mm-hmm.
So, I would say that's probably the biggest area that's a trouble area.
So just kind of going too fast.
Yeah, it's really something that there are so many different components of this. Obviously, to try to find a vendor maybe to, uh, just walk you through a process that's going to help you. You don't have to vet maybe as hard as you do someone that's going to be, that's going to perform that service for you directly.
Hmm.
Um, so if they were to use a consultant to find, to find a billing company or a coding company or a credentialing company, that consultant would bear a lot of that, that heavy lifting, if you will, and help you avoid those mistakes. And I've been in situations where I'm dealing directly with the potential client or with a consultant that is referring that client in and then does all of that due diligence, if you will.
So I hadn't thought of it this way before, but it makes sense. Are you suggesting that hiring a vendor should be treated kind of sort of like as if you were going to hire an employee, like the same kind of vigilance, rigor, kind of sort of?
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, I'd say it's close to equal. Um, it can be a lot different based upon the employment laws in each locality,
Sure.
state that you're in, of course, where it becomes a little bit more grave when you make a personnel error. But just for example, in outsourcing your billing or your coding, I mean, if you make a bad decision, you're probably going to find out pretty quickly, and then you're going to get into a situation where, you're not going to recover the money that you should have been paid just because of timely filing issues and things like that. Because you got to let it play out for a little bit once you get started.
Yeah. It's interesting. So let's just put two scenarios side by side. You want to solve your billing problem. You're either one choice is to hire an employee, and the other one is to find an outsourced, provider of the same. And they each showed up and they said, "We have 20 years of experience." If it was an employee scenario, you would still do all sorts of vetting, right? You'd have a couple of interviews. You'd have them meet the team. You'd check their background. You do all sorts of other things. Not that you can do every one of those steps for an outsourced provider, but you can do a lot of those things, right? Or pretty similar. Yeah, and yet I'll bet you a fair number of people kind of shortchange those things. So the original question was, what process do you go through? Maybe the answer is, if you were to hire an employee instead, take that process and mimic it as, I don't know, as much as you can, but grab the major sort of vigilance steps and do them anyway,
Yeah,
right?
definitely. I think a lot of folks, what a lot of folks do is, I mean, the same as if you were gonna, hire somebody. I mean, you're gonna interview more than one candidate. You do the
Yeah.
same thing when you're talking to a vendor. I mean, the old rule of thumb is, get three proposals, three quotes. Everybody usually thinks of that as it relates to price only. Um,
Yeah.
I, I think it's a lot more important than the price, especially when you're buying a service, because uh, the consequences of making a bad decision can cost a heck of a lot more than the service itself.
Yeah, I can. And one of the things you kind of said earlier is when you go fast, just immediate relief from the pain, it's usually luck if that immediate relief choice turns into long-term relief.
Mhm.
Um, but if you go fast on a big choice, you could get lucky. But why would you put it to luck? You know?
And what happens is, a lot of times what happens is, sometimes in folks' business career, you might get lucky the first time, and then the second time that you have to make that
Now you're all
decision.
full of yourself. You can do
Yeah,
this.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Then
Look at
you don't
me.
get hurt. You don't get hurt right away necessarily, but maybe down the road you will. I mean, the research portion of this is critical. A lot
Yeah,
of
tell me
folks,
about that.
yeah, a lot of folks will, in this business, they'll basically talk to their friends, their colleagues, people that may be in the same specialty or different specialties, and ask them, who do you use, and ask them questions. And that's a great place to start.
Hmm.
I mean, uh, we don't have the yellow pages anymore, if you will. You got to go
Hmm.
to the internet and you have to search, and
Hmm.
search locally and search regionally and nationally. I think is the best way to do it. As far as one of the things that you have to be a little bit careful about is when you get a referral from someone that might be using them now, is that, there's a couple questions that you got to ask. And the first one is, is there any relationship that you have to the ownership or management of that vendor? I mean, it doesn't mean that you don't want to do business with somebody's cousin that owns an RCM company, but you should know that up front. Because maybe they're not being as impartial with their answers as they might.
Oh,
Uh,
so you mean if a colleague recommended me to outsource solution provider X, you're wondering, are you referring me because you think they're a really good fit? Or are you referring me because there's some
or your
other,
relative.
yeah, your relative, or there's some other, something that might cloud your judgment to say, no, I think they're a really good fit.
Yeah, I mean, there can be referral incentives, all
Hmm.
that sort of thing. I mean, that's possible. I worry more, not so much about referral incentives in this particular instance, but more
Hmm.
along the lines of referring to, friends or family that may have started a business that, need business, if you will.
Yeah. Yeah. And to your point earlier, you should get more than one referral, usually.
Yeah,
Um,
more than one quote. So I would talk in general, once you've established, five or six vendors, I mean, then you have to go through a phone call screening type of situation where, you kind of see that you fit.
mhm.
That the philosophies are the same, that you have the same things that in mind. I can think of if the provider asks a question, something like, "Are you going to collect every last penny for me that is out there?" And the potential vendor says, "Well, we do have, we do employ small balance, policies, and we would expect you to. And if you don't like that answer, then you don't want to use that vendor." I
Yeah.
mean, I think that's a reasonable answer. There's certainly a cost benefit analysis that goes down to sending patients, statements for 56 cents, that
Yeah.
kind of thing. So,
Costs more to collect it than to just let it
yeah,
go, right? Yeah.
yeah, exactly. So I think, you want to end up after you do the phone screen, you want to get three quotes. And then you've got to evaluate those quotes. And you've got to make sure that all of the services that that you don't assume that anything is being, is going to be done. Because if it's not in the contract, once we get to the contract phase,
Yeah.
it's on you.
Yeah. And
So
what I mean, what's behind a lot of what you said was, if you need to, at some point, either you need to know what's important to me in service provider X in that area, whether it's marketing or billing, revenue, like whatever it might be, an attorney. You have to have some idea, and if you don't, you're back to kind of guessing. So, I mean, one thing that I've told some people is, if it's there's never a bad time to quote unquote have a coffee with an agency in some area, just kind of get to know them, because you never know, and just and even that kind of discussion, you can become smarter about what's out there, what's important, how they think, so that if you ever want to make a change, or you need to make a change, or the house is on fire, you're a bit smarter. But you got to know it, or you have to trust somebody. You have to have somebody you trust who does know it, who can help you make a thoughtful choice. So yeah.
yeah. Yeah, definitely. It's a lot of times folks are just looking at the price when it comes in, when they
Hmm.
get the quotes, they're just looking at price. And, getting back to what you were saying, I mean, that's an excellent idea, Carl, to just stay in contact. I mean, to have a network of people that you can rely on, or go to in a pinch, even though you might not need that service right now. But so that, I mean, that's a great point. I didn't want to pass by that. But jumping back to evaluating quotes, you want to make sure that everything's in there. Price is obviously important. Performance is more important.
Hmm.
Uh, and value. Everyone gets, kind of gets the, I get that. I do it myself. The collective eye roll when I hear the word value. Getting,
Yeah, I don't like
you
using
know,
that term. And what
Yeah,
does it
I mean,
not mean? It could be anything
yeah,
you want it to.
yeah, and I mean, really, what the way I interpret what that means is that when I'm trying to sell a service that some folks might think is commoditized, they might just think, well, a back office service, whether it be accounting, bookkeeping, uh, RCM type management is just back office. It's just a commodity.
Hmm.
Uh, when the commodity has an impact on what your bottom line is beyond what you're paying that vendor. In other words, in an RCM situation, they're driving your cash flow.
Hmm.
Uh, so, I mean, the value proposition is, okay, I'm going to remove a headache. I don't have to worry about hiring in this area. I don't have to worry about turnover, which is, it's a big issue right now, locally. And I've seen it really across the country where long before COVID, 5, 10 years ago, a lot of medical billers went into medical coding, for example. And the
Hmm.
reason they did it is they wanted to work from home.
Hmm.
That's kind of become moot now, but a lot of them went and got coding certifications because, I mean, let's face it. I mean, demographically, a lot of folks that do billing type work and coding type work are young females of childbearing age, and they have kids, and they wanted to be available for their kids to get them on the bus and off the bus, et cetera, et cetera. And so we've lost a lot of billers, and the billers have kind of gotten to a point where they're getting close to retirement. We're not training a lot of new billers,
Hmm.
I think I'm hopeful that that's going to change just because, because now with the work from home protocol, it doesn't really matter. I mean, you can work from home anywhere. Much easier to
Yeah.
gauge how coders are doing from home than billers
Yeah.
from an employer standpoint, but from an employee standpoint, it doesn't matter as much. So,
Yeah.
so that's kind of what I mean by value. It's you remove the headache. So you
Yeah.
remove that headache of managing that process for a price that is close to maybe what you're paying now, or to outsource it or insource it.
Yeah, just this morning I was talking to a friend of mine. He does a fair amount of like website building work for us, and we were talking about this related issue. And he said, there's this other way you could. He didn't say it this way. There's this other way you could buy these services, and that is you buy them and you'll spend less money, but essentially you're on your like he didn't say this. You're on your own, right? So you have to fix things. And I said, I value the customer support. I like that. Even if there's one service in particular, I thought, if I email them once a year with a question, it's probably a lot, but I like knowing it's there and it wasn't expensive anyway. And I always look for that because I never know. And I don't want to spend an hour or 2 hours to try to figure it out myself, even if I could. I just want to call somebody and move on with my priorities. And so value, it's very subjective, it's personal, but it's worth thinking about what those things are. You were mentioning a couple of times, like getting to the sign of the contract stage. And I've seen this. I've sent proposals to people with an agreement and I get it back like 6 seconds later signed. And I say two things to myself. Thank you very much. And I know what's in it and I know it's honest, but you couldn't possibly have even skimmed this thing. So, and by the way, one of them is a business associate agreement, which is something you got to have in place to be HIPAA compliant. It's 12 pages and it's
Right.
boring. And I've tried to read it, but they didn't, And so what are the steps you recommend, people go through before they sign a contract?
Yeah, that's a good question, Carl. So, for services that, for example, for RCM type services, there's a few things, and really it can go to really almost any service. And probably the most important thing from a, just a realistic standpoint is, who's responsible for what?
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, there really should be a section in the scope of services or into the body of the contract that just basically says who's responsible for what.
Mm-hmm.
And that just sounds so basic, but there are so many different steps in a billing relationship, for example. I mean, who's going to be posting, who's going to be posting the charges, who's going to be releasing the charges.
And you mean
Obviously,
like not names, but like the client versus the agency.
right.
That's
Yeah, exactly.
right. Is anything falling through the cracks? Yes or yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Which party is going to be doing
Right.
that? So, and it's important from a couple different, standpoints. Is that you've got to be able to figure out, well, how much time am I saving? What don't I need to do anymore? You need to know what
Mm-hmm.
all those things are. I'll give you an example. a simple example would be is, at the end of the collection process, occasionally there's refunds that are due. Who's going to figure the refunds out? Is it going to be the billing company? Is it going to be the client?
Mhm.
Is the client going to cut the check, or am I going to cut the check? Who's
Mhm.
going to approve it? Do I want to approve it? And you can go through that for almost every single, phase of that, of that process. And that part is that part is really significant. So you don't get off on the wrong foot,
Mhm.
with the vendor, and if you're the on the other side, the same thing. So you just
Mhm.
want to, you want to make sure that that gets off smoothly. So, that's the biggest thing I think from the internal contract review. The other thing that I think is important from a RCM standpoint, revenue cycle management standpoint, is, uh, you know, what are the I would have performance measures inserted in the contract.
Mhm.
Uh, what are you going to perform at? And there's two key metrics. I mean, days in AR, which we can talk about a little bit later, and the days in AR, which is the number of days in accounts receivable from, how long does it take you to get paid? And the other one is, what are my accounts over 90 days, and what percentage is that of the total of my
Yeah.
accounts receivable? So that's, what happens if you don't meet those metrics?
Mhm.
So that's important. The other thing that's important is the termination clauses. How can I get out of the contract if what are my options? If you're
Yeah.
not performing, how long do you have to cure it? A lot of people will go in and sign 2, 3 year contracts, and they're kind of just locked in, and the only way they get out is if somebody goes bankrupt, or that
Some
sort of.
crazy scenario, rare scenario. Yeah.
Yeah, so that's, I mean, you want to make sure that you have an out. And finally, always very important to have your counsel review, all the agreements and portions of the agreements. I mean, you aptly mentioned the HIPAA agreement yesterday, and how people just sign that and don't realize what they're signing away. And then there's also protections that you need in a regular, performance type contract, like an RCM contract.
Yeah. I know for me, just to add one or two things. One is everything that we agreed you were going to do in this actual agreement, which means, what we do is we have a walkthrough of, here's the recommendations, here's what I propose that you do, and it's not an agreement yet, and we kind of agree on all that, and then I make sure that all gets in the agreement. But you should still check it, because if I said I was going to do 5 things but only 4 show up in the agreement, I made a mistake, and I'm happy to be called out on it, but nobody's perfect. And then the other thing is, at least read through the terms, and just, if there's anything in there that you're like, what is that? What does that mean?
Right.
It's okay to ask. You should know what you're signing. I mean, you're probably signing, you're, if you're willing to outsource something to somebody else, then you are willing to pay probably a material amount of money to get something material done.
Mhm.
Isn't it worth a little bit of time? Easy for us to say, days are busy, but the risks of kind of plowing through this quickly, we've kind of brought, again, it's luck. So
Yeah,
yeah,
great point.
take your time. I mean, you'd read somebody's resume, right? You'd read their background checks. You'd put in some time. So even if you put in a little less time, put in some time.
Mhm.
How do you monitor performance? I mean, you kind of hinted at it, but like I could, for us, at least for clients of a certain size, we have a monthly meeting. It's first week of the month. They're starting up today. We go through, how'd the month go? What do you
Mhm.
want to talk about? There's a check-in, but what do you recommend?
Yeah, yeah. So I mean, that's another thing that should be in the contract is,
Yeah.
what are the reporting things, and how, not qualifications, but the requirements that the client has. What do they want to see, and
Hmm.
how often are we going to meet? And is it going to be regularly, monthly, quarterly, weekly, whatever? So I mean, yeah, those are great points. You know, as far as performance goes, Carl, I mean, really, like we talked about, like I mentioned a little bit earlier, is the days in AR calculation. So a lot of folks will say, well, the days in AR calculation, it needs to be, in an average of, 33, 27, whatever the number is.
Hmm.
There are so many different ways to calculate days in AR that you really should get that straight first.
Hmm.
We use, typically what we'll use is we'll use the last 3 months sales for that portion of the equation,
Hmm.
rather than a full year. So you really should get that down first and make sure that you're dealing apples to apples. You can't just go to an accounting book and look that up. You can, but that might
Yeah.
not be methodology that is the most pertinent in today's medical world, let's
Yeah.
say. So you first have to agree on how does the formula work first, and then secondly, double check the calculation every month. It's very easy to double check once you know what the formula is.
True.
And then, really it should be tracked. They should be showing it every month for you so that you can watch it. And if it's above or below whatever the agreed to number is, and if you fall below that number, or in this case, more days in AR than was agreed to,
Yeah.
we going to do? How long are we going to wait for this to be remediated?
Yeah.
If it's 10% or 20% over, it's a little bit bigger of a problem than 1 or 2% over.
Hmm.
So obviously you have to have performance measures in the contract. And again, maybe if you miss the goal for 2 consecutive months, I mean, you've got one more month to fix it, 3 consecutive months, and we can turn the contract.
I was
You know,
just going to say, yeah, like you going back to reading it, think about, what do I want these people to do? How do I know if they're doing it well? And if they're not, what are my options? So if you
right.
sign, you said people sign 2 or 3 year agreements. If that's locked in, um, even if they don't perform, it could be gnarly. In the marketing world, there's a number of like larger kind of marketing, we didn't say marketing agencies, marketing companies, is large marketing companies where you're going to sign for a year and you can get out, but you're still going to pay either everything you owe. If you quit halfway through the year, you still, or some prorated amount. It's not so free and clear to get out. Um, so, think about what if you don't? How can I get out? Because who would stay? If there was an employee, I'll go back to the comparison, who was just underperforming 2, 3 months in a row and it wasn't getting any better, you'd have the talk, you'd have the warning, you'd have, you'd move down the path of terminating, even if you hope you didn't have to in the end. But you got to have the same kind of flexibility, I would think.
Yeah, that's definitely true, Carl. And the thing is that a lot of physicians, I mean, they're when they go to school, they're not trained on how to run a business, and a lot of
No.
these things they're learning. A lot of it's intuitive, and you learn it as you go along.
Hmm.
And a lot of things that I see, the mistakes that I typically see are more errors of omission than commission. It's not
Hmm.
having that conversation sooner with the employee. It's not having that conversation with the vendor and just getting annoyed about it.
Yeah.
That sort of a thing. So yeah, I mean, those are all valid points. The other, to jump to the other KPI measure, it's how many how much do I have from a percentage basis in my over 90 days? And a lot of times I'll carve out the patient piece depending on what the patient policy is for billing.
Hmm.
So, I don't want to be held responsible for your poor patient policy and collection. Uh,
Well, yes. It's funny in the marketing world, there's something similar. Once in a blue moon, I'll be asked um, how we get paid. And basically we charge, an agreed amount of money every month, but I'll be asked, would you be willing to be paid as like a percentage of the patients you bring in? And I always say no.
right,
And one of the reasons I give is, and I say this very diplomatically, is, but in so many words, look, if you screw up the phone calls, you know, what am I supposed to do? It's out of my control. Things that are out of my control, I couch it as I can't, what competitors are doing. And if you guys are not good at kind of closing the deal when a patient calls or a prospective patient call, same thing. So you've got to stick with what is in your control. Yeah. This is really interesting. I mean, for me, the biggest, I never thought about it before, but the biggest thing for me is have the mindset of I'm hiring an employee. Carbon copy? No, but there's a discipline that I think automatically triggers for lots of people because, on top of all the things providers didn't learn in school, we talk about they didn't learn marketing, they didn't learn accounting, they didn't learn anything else, but they didn't learn HR either. They didn't learn how to hire. Hiring is hard. There are people who do it for a lifetime and only get mediocre because they're hiring strangers.
right,
You're choosing strangers to do really important things for you.
right.
It gets easier with experience, but it's never crystal clear. But if you walk in with that mindset, I'm hiring somebody, there's a discipline that I'd like to think turns on for lots of people, which wouldn't otherwise. And maybe that's the start. of making better decisions,
Yeah, I agreed, definitely.
Is there anything you think I should have asked you that we should have talked about, but we didn't in this context?
Um, I'd say probably, maybe that I didn't mention is, uh, one of the best things to do is, I mean, everyone uses Google search now, so that's a great way to find what's out there, and I
Hmm.
think I kind of touched on that a little bit. And really, polling your colleagues, I think is a good way to do that too. But have good questions for them and ask them why, not just because they've been in a relationship for 10 years and it's okay.
Hmm.
Uh, that sort of a thing. The only other thing that I can think of is, uh, evaluating, in a relationship like a billing relationship. How do I want to be charged? A lot of folks will say, when I talk to people, I'd say probably half my clients are some modified form of percentage of receipts because it's not kosher to be charging percentage of receipts on any kind of Medicaid business. Um,
Okay.
so that's a no-no. So you got to you charge a percentage of receipts on everything else, and then a flat fee per encounter on that business.
Hmm.
I'd say the other half of my business is everything's a flat fee per encounter.
Hmm.
And some people, despite the fact that I'll kind of push for the latter, I'll push for let's not do the percentage of receipts. It gets a little bit murky as to why we're doing what we're doing, and we are agnostic on our resources, whether no matter how we charge. So, but a lot of people feel it keeps our skin in the game to get the money in if we're on a percentage. So
Yeah.
I can't argue with that thought.
Yeah. And one question that you can ask when you say ask your colleagues, one question you can ask that can get to a lot is, if you had to do it all over again, would you choose them again? Now that
Right.
you've been with them, and boy, you can get some really good, and just ask the why, the 5 whys. Even if you ask 3 of the 5, you'll get pretty far. Um, but it's a good way in. Like, oh yeah, I choose them. Why? Because, well, their service is amazing, or for whatever the reason. And that's all kind of good learning for you who haven't hired in that area yet. I like that. So cool. The other question is, so we've caught somebody's attention. They've been thinking, oh, I need to outsource function X. And, we just haven't done it before for whatever reason. Um, where would you recommend they start? Sometimes people get stuck at the starting line of just how to get started on something they've never done before or haven't done in a while. Where would you recommend?
Again, the first thing I would do is I would go to the internet. Okay. And I think you can just research questions, just start asking questions to Google, and you'll get all sorts of answers.
Mm-hmm.
And again, just going back to, I mean, one of the things that's important is that, the type of business that I like to do business with is, I like to ask folks, do you have what's your mission statement?
Mm-hmm.
Do you have a values statement? What are they? And
Mm-hmm.
share with me how you came up with it. Did you inherit it from the previous owner? What do you
Yeah.
believe? That sort of thing.
You mean
I
asking that of a potential vendor?
yeah, definitely. I
Yeah.
mean, I think that that's critical. You want to make sure that you're aligned with the way that what you think is important.
Mm-hmm.
And
I like
personally, and
that.
yeah, that's an important thing. I forgot to mention earlier. It's really we went through this process maybe about 15 years ago and established all of that. And it wasn't just like, okay, this is what I think.
Yeah.
We got our management team together and we went over this, in 5 or 6 meetings over a couple month period till we were all happy with what the answers were.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it gets back to the criteria, what's important to you. And when you start researching, at least this is true for me, I'll research, you know, one vendor and they'll say A, B, C, and D. And I'll write that all down. That sounds important. And then when you're on your fourth or fifth, they say E, F, G, and H. I'm like, oh, now I got to go back to the first one and see what they say about it. But
Yeah,
the evaluation, I say, gets bigger before it gets smaller. But eventually, you've kind of got the universe, and now you start to narrow it down, and you're smarter about it along the way, and it's worth it because remember, you've got three options: hire an employee, outsource it, or do nothing. And if you're thinking about the first or the second one, do nothing's kind of running its course. So if you put all sorts of vigor into hiring an employee, I hope that you would, then put at least, I don't know, 70% of that or whatever into choosing a vendor instead. That's, to me, that's one of the biggest takeaways.
Yeah, great points, Carl.
Tom, we could go on all day. I say this to a lot of guests because it's just topics that I really enjoy and I think they're important to others. But in the interest of more bite-sized advice for our listeners, I will say thank you again for coming on PracticeCare, sharing what you know. Tom Maher, we're going to put all the contact information that you sent to us in the show notes for your episode, so that anyone who wants to get a hold of you can do so. And a couple of points before we wrap up. First, if you're like Tom or I and you serve private practice owners, or if you are a private practice owner yourself, either way, if you've got some business experience on the business side of private practice that you think others would benefit from, we want you to come on PracticeCare as soon as you can so that you can tell them about it. In the show notes for Tom's episode and every episode, there's a link, a couple of questions. Tell us what's on your mind so that we can get you scheduled as soon as possible. And finally, if you haven't done it yet, we have a new episode every week. Please subscribe to PracticeCare. We're on Apple, we're on Spotify, we're on many other major podcast platforms. We're on YouTube. We're easy to find. Subscribe so that whenever each new episode drops, you'll get it right away and you can stay up to date. Thanks very much. And until next time.